welcome back to another edition here of Level Up Mental Health. I'm your host here, Swizz, and we're going to go through some good. We're going to go through another good topic here related to boundaries. Now, I know this is can be a hot topic for a lot of you out there, especially if we are encountering toxicity with others, and it can be hard especially if we're looking at kind of those the family kind of relationships that we may have, being able to kind of think about what boundaries we're setting in place, right? So this is going to be a good kind of overview, psychoeducation, especially related to boundaries that we may exhibit towards others, and what is the ultimate goal that we want to get to with our boundaries here. Okay, so before we do that, I'm going to go and kind of share this area here. I kind of like showing this relationship circle first here too, because ultimately throughout our lives, what we have is we kind of have this network of people, right? Kind of this web of people around us that are in our lives. And throughout that time, we have kind of a lot of different categories. We usually kind of lump them into, right? We have our intimate, loyal friends. Could be your partner, best friends, whoever it may be. Even kind of family members. You may have some of these as well. Good, dependable friends are kind of the outside circle here. So you may like trust everything that you have in your entire life, whatever it is. You know that they would, if they did anything wrong, it would be absolutely devastating. But these are kind of your go-to people. And then this is like the second tier, where you may reveal a decent amount of things, but you also may have issues of just kind of revealing everything, right? Because of the fact there may be a particular characteristic or category about them that you may not feel as invested, right? And then we move on to the next area here, which is related to acquaintances. So this might be like maybe some coworkers, some things just kind of in general that obviously you could just kind of tell they're like, yeah, I'm not going to share my intimate, deepest things with these acquaintances, right? So, being able to just kind of recognize where that is key. And then ultimately we have possibilities. So people that you feel that are like, I'm not really sure where they're at. They could be an issue. I don't want to take my chances. So then, you're just kind of taking that step back from that, just to kind of see like what maybe there's a certain criteria that they need to have in order to kind of get to the intimate and loyal friends. And then the last one here, we had the danger zone, right? These are the people that we definitely define as toxic, issues that we feel that we're like, okay, this person I know is just really, they're going to just kind of drive me up the wall, right? So we want to make sure that we're kind of aware of that so that we're protecting ourselves and our relationships so that, they don't kind of damage them. Now, as you can see with these kind of these arrows, people can move towards that intimate, loyal friends, or they can move away, right? Depending kind of interactions, conversations, how that relationship may be, really just kind of impact that. One of the biggest things, especially as we're kind of looking at the boundaries, a lot of the time you immediately think of like if there's any kind of narcissism or things of that nature, and where that kind of may be. And especially as we kind of dive into we look at the boundaries, we can see how hard it can be when people are in kind of that intimate circle, right? We may have these people here, but we also recognize that they're going to be on the outside and they're kind of the dangerous folks, right? So let's get into kind of exploring the boundaries here, and then we'll see kind of where we're at. So as we were kind of saying here at the beginning, the goal here is to be able to define what are boundaries, right? And especially if we're looking at those relationships in our life, we want to be able to kind of recognize this so that when we do have these particular relationships, we can be aware of like, okay, like what is the ultimate goal that we want to have with this person. Now, what's interesting about this is that every person that you're going to interact with, you're going to have a particular boundary that you're going to set up with them. And the three kind of main boundaries that we're going to review here are rigid boundaries, porous boundaries, and healthy boundaries. Now, you may not want to have kind of, let's say, a particular boundary with one particular person in that sense as well, too, right? Obviously, we may feel we are more the rigid side if we feel we had a particular relationship that was very damaging, right? So we may not be, involved. We maybe just kind of have difficulties at kind of doing in being able to kind of share those things. And it could just be kind of a whole group of particular people as well too, right? Like we may just kind of blanket everyone and say, how you have kind of these rigid boundaries or have these porous boundaries. It's all depending on kind of the relationships in the past that you've had and these experiences that really shape how, again, you're going to interact with these people and where kind of these boundaries will come across, right? So obviously with boundaries, we're setting the limits and rules that we have, with ourselves and our relationships. And ultimately we want to strive for those healthy boundaries so that we can say no if there is a request that's being made towards us, right? Knowing for the fact that we can open ourselves up and be comfortable and have these close relationships, even if we get denied ourselves, right? So it's hard, right? Especially if you look at kind of your past, the difficulties that you may have had, trauma that may have been encountered. You could kind of tell and reflect of like, okay, maybe I'm more of a rigid side or porous side because of these experiences that you've had, right? And that's going to shape those kind of relationships in the future. So let's take a look at these boundaries and we'll take about just kind of, again, just reflecting on, as I said, just kind of the information and increasing the awareness about these boundaries. So the first one we have here is rigid boundaries. So this individual may avoid intimacy in close relationships, unlikely to ask for help, may have a few close relationships, very protective of personal information, may seem detached even with romantic partners, and keeps others at a distance to avoid possibility of rejection. Now, again, a lot of that can be established due to trauma that had occurred, right? That maybe they shared so much information and now they got hurt themselves and now they're like, okay, like, what is the point of sharing this information if I'm going to continue to get hurt? So let me put this stone wall up and I'm going to avoid any of these possibilities so I don't get hurt myself again, right? So that's where a lot of kind of those rigid boundaries can really kind of be into play for someone that may have that, right? The next kind of boundary here is the porous boundary. So the oversharing of personal information, difficulty saying no to the requests of others, over-involved with others' problems, depend on the opinions of others, accepting of abuse or disrespect, fears of rejection, they do not comply with others. So what's kind of interesting, right now my household is just all into K-pop demon hunters, right? So Mira and I forget the other one, not Rumi. Rumi's the main one. I'm talking about K-pop demon hunters. The other two there, you can kind of see how Mira I think is the one that had the rigid boundaries. And then the other one has kind of the porous boundaries, right? So where there's oversharing, the difficulty saying no for the requests of others and wanting to be involved, right? And a lot of that is due to just kind of ensuring that they want to be liked, they want to be appreciated. Maybe there was some neglect at the household that prevented their ability to get that particular attention, right? So now it's just kind of they're starving for it to kind of get that view, and that's where that porous boundary is, because they want to share all this information so that they can feel appreciated or feel like that love may have not have occurred when they were growing up, right? And then the ultimate goal here is those healthy boundaries, right? The values or opinions of others. We don't want to compromise our values for others, and we want to share this kind of personal information in an appropriate way, to not to over or undershare with certain things as well. And again, kind of know our personal wants and needs and be able to kind of communicate them and accept when others say no to them, right? So that's the ultimate goal that we want to get to, right? And it's easier said than done, as we've all kind of experienced with these relationships. Ultimately, it just is going to take a lot of work to kind of get there. And ultimately, when we're kind of going through this, and especially if we have maybe those kind of rigid boundaries, right? Kind of the being able to kind of sit with the information that if you do open yourselves up, yeah, you can get hurt, but you could also enjoy kind of a particular relationship that may have not been there had you not taken that step forward, right? Being able to kind of take that risk, which can be, easier said than done with certain things. So with this, a lot of people have kind of the mixed boundary types. We could have healthy boundaries at work, of course, in romantic relationships, a mix with all these in our family, right? And again, family can be nuts with certain things. So, through this, kind of think about your boundaries and the impact that they may have there. Obviously, the appropriateness of the boundaries depend heavily on the setting. So where you're at, it depends on kind of what you're going to respond with. And lastly, here, I think this is always interesting too about how cultural influences really impact how boundaries are established with others, right? So think about these things, think about your boundaries, and, again, think about how you feel that they have been kind of impacting your relationships. What do you feel is needed or to get to a particular healthy relationship with a person in your life, right? Where you feel your values are not compromised. And at the end of the day, what's important to understand is that you can only do so much as a person, right? Obviously, it takes two in a particular relationship. So if you're putting that out there, you're putting that work into it, um, and the other person is not being, is not putting the same amount of work or more work or whatever it is that you need, that's something to kind of reflect on that relationship too, where it's like, where do I go from here? Can this ever be a healthy boundary that I have with this person, or is it going to be something where I'm rigid the entire time, right? And it's something to kind of think about. And at the end of the day, you have to make the choices that you feel is best for you, for your family, whatever it is, because again, that's what matters there, right? You want to focus on you and ensure that if they're a part of your lives, that they can contribute, then that's important as well too. So thank you all for watching. I'm going to take a little kind of minute or so break here. We're going to dive into Psychonauts here. I have a meeting later, so we'll go from there. But thank you.